tries to soften it, but it's so, I could never figure out how to see it. Because I'm not him.
Right, exactly. Well, that's,
Yeah.
I mean, well, thank you.
Yeah, oh, well, you'll enjoy it, I think. That's what I said. It's not real long.
Perfect.
Sunday.
Good morning. My name is Beth Andes, and it is my ultimate delight to welcome you all here today to All Souls Universalist Unitarian Church. Before I greet our irregular visitors, I'm going to greet our regular visitors. Composer and musician Daniel Doss, who's on the piano for us today. And helping us as song leader and alto section leader in choir, Shanna Jones. Shanna Jones. I checked the pronunciation, then I blew it, sorry. Don't you know? All right, so if there are any visitors who are here with us today and feel brave enough to stand up and introduce yourselves, we would love to greet you and just tell us your name and where you're from.
I'm Bailey. I don't want to stand.
That's okay, Bailey.
I'm from Liberty. And I'm excited to
Welcome. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Mark from Manhattan, Kansas. Fellowship there, UFM, and Denise is actually local in Kansas City.
Welcome. Welcome. All right, and we welcome any of you who were not brave enough to stand and say your names. I do want to let the visitors know that we have lunch today that you can have for free. That's woohoo privilege. And so if you would like to identify yourself as a visitor, you will have lunch and you'll get to meet some of us. Now, just one little bit of housekeeping, which is emergency exits. There are 3 at the back of the room, but there's also 2 up here. If you're closer to the front, there's 1 on either side in case of emergency. Welcome to all.
Dearly beloved, welcome to this gathering of those who seek the highest ways of the human spirit in freedom. For this hour, we who are here now compose the covenant community of memory and promise. But we are not alone, for we stand in the long and noble heritage of this free faith, this quest for meaning, goodness, and understanding that is as old as human reason and human wonder. We come together today to celebrate not only the connections of today, but also the long arc of humanity's spiritual growth as we continue to learn how to live together in greater human dignity, meaning, and joy. This morning we turn from the crises and challenges that so urgently confront us in the present day to seek instruction from those who have gone before. Do not underestimate the wisdom that the past has to teach us. If we think that we are the first people ever to encounter religious and political dogmatism, if we suppose that we are the only generation to be confronted by the forces of willful ignorance and popular superstition, then we may make the mistake of believing that intelligence and integrity are demanded of us as they have never been demanded in times before. But wait. Is ours the threshold of a new world full of unprecedented opportunities? Well, so was theirs. Are we threatened by forces of arrogant power and entrenched privilege? So were they. Is the path of reason, compassion, liberty, and truth narrow before us? So it was for them. And it is worth recalling the stories of those who trod that path with resolution and even sacrifice, for from their lives may come inspiration to help us in our own day. It is well said that those who refuse to learn from history are condemned to repeat it. As we would urge this realization upon others, let us take it to heart ourselves. Let us kindle again the flame in this chalice, the light, a symbol since ancient times of humanity's quest for understanding, enlightenment, and wisdom. In that quest, we join our own lives and labors, dedicating ourselves and this hour to its celebration.
Good morning.
I don't think you got it. Try again. Yeah. Now try.
Good morning. My name is Evan, and I light this chalice for respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part.
Well done, thank you. Now I invite you to rise in body or spirit as you are willing and able, and let's begin with our opening hymn. Our commitment to human fellowship means that we are called upon to be glad with those who rejoice and to weep with those who mourn. And so we set aside this time in our gathering to share with one another the joys and the concerns which are now shaping our lives. May the beauty and sweetness of these brief flowers remind us to hold one another in the bonds of sympathy, encouragement, and care. I begin with a flower of celebration for our new administrator, Leandra Salazar Slaughter, who is in the office for her first day this morning. So if you get it to, yay, that's right. We are so happy and excited to welcome Leandra. She'll be here on Sundays for the next month while she completes her responsibilities to her past employer, and then in the middle of November, she'll start being with us full time. Get to know her. She's a delightful person. And I also want to put a flower of celebration and also concern for Anthony Edwards, who had some minor eye surgery this week. And he's doing well, but we miss him, and we'll be glad to see him next week. And he sends his greetings. Are there other joys or concerns to be shared? Yes, come on up. Go ahead, Jeff.
On the first Sunday in September, I think it was the 3rd, I lost my very best friend of 23 years, Gail. Outside of my family, she was the best human I've ever known, and I'm going to miss her a great deal.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
I have a joy and a concern. First, the joy. Me and my family are moving on October 26th to a bigger, more spacious house.
Excellent. Yay.
Yay. And my concern is kind of what our country is going through right now. And I hope everything gets resolved fairly quickly.
Don't turn that off. I think we're all with you. I'm going to take a flower. There you go.
So that's my son, so I'm joyous about him.
Yeah.
And my other family that's here. So the other thing that I'm joyous about is that I took over as a speech and debate coach at Oak Park. So I'm really excited about that. Go find someone to turn down the damn But I'm also a little bit concerned about that because this coming weekend, Friday and Saturday, we are hosting the speech and debate tournament, which they didn't do last year, and the year before didn't go off so well. So we don't have a lot of people that are in our group of support there yet because we're building the program. So you all can help with that concern. If you would like to volunteer to be a judge at the speech and debate tournament, I can hang out after the service and I can take your name and information. And I'd really love to see some people come out and support these great kids. We host the tournament so that other schools can come and compete, so that when we go out, we're doing our fair share because we compete at their tournament. So it's kind of your responsibility to help make sure that all the kids in the Kansas City area have this opportunity to grow and learn. And it's a novice tournament, so don't feel like you have to be an expert in speech or debate because they just need some pointers. So we'll take anyone that can hold a pencil and write their name, basically.
Thank you. Hi.
My life has been really hard because my dog died 3 years ago, and I just found the one that I took care of mostly since that happened.
Oh, I'm sorry. That is hard. Hi, Rose.
I have a joy. Well, that's odd. My cousin just got married last night. So.
Yay.
And luckily, I actually got to go to this one.
Excellent. Congratulations to.
That was hurting.
All right. Bonnie.
I have a joy for Sarah Greer, whose dog passed his therapy certification yesterday. She now has a fully certified therapy dog. And if you've ever trained a dog, there's a lot of work that goes to therapy dogs.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you. Congratulations, Sarah. Wave. There she is. Yeah.
I have a joy. Last Thursday evening, I was with a group of students and activists at my former school at Central Theological Seminary. And I met a guy who is working at Afghanistan as a peace activist. And one of the stories that he shared was that a lot of the tribe women come together at the refugee center and they weaved blankets to share with the other refugee center. And so that just gives me a lot of joy that in spite of what is going on in our world, that there are women who are willing to come together and work for peace. And that is exactly what I am trying to do here with the Stitching Change sewing project in Kansas City, Kansas. Some of you have come and supported us on Saturday. We had our 3rd anniversary in this church. So thank you. And thank you to all the women and men who are tirelessly working for peace.
Oh. Thank you, Rockney.
Hi, Marley Murphy. Hopefully most of you know my partner, Tommy Graves, tall, dark, and handsome, hiding in the back there. His family members have for years and years lived far away, so haven't been able to be particularly close because of that distance. And right now his niece, Krishanda, is visiting us for the first time. And if we live through her visit, this is going to be a great thing. So that's a great joy for us.
Good luck with that. That's good.
I just want to have a joy for all the people who have come out to our service projects for our 150th anniversary, and I want to invite many more of you to come. We need your help. So you can watch the website for events, but we worked on a Christmas in October house, Mark Gibbons and Walt Wells and some other people, the Brennans. So thank you all for doing that.
I heard that they did great things.
They did.
Yeah.
Small crew, great things.
Are there, yes, Ellie.
Well, I have a concern for all the people that are suffering with the fires in California, and the joy that my daughter is not among them.
Yeah. Are you going to put a flower?
Oh.
Thank you. And among those who've been affected and lost their homes are several members of some of our congregations in California. So we'll be doing a collection to help them one of these days. Are there other joys and concerns to be shared? If not, I place a final flower in recognition of all the outreachings of the Spirit that abide unspoken in our hearts, and invite you to share with me the congregational response on this. Oh, no, actually, sorry, I forgot. If there is anyone who would like to express a joy or a concern just within this room that will not be part of the podcast, we have a moment where you can do that off camera. Would anyone like to come forward? We'll be doing this in the future, so if you'd rather wait until you're not on camera, you can do that. If not, then we'll go on to the congregational response and say this together. This day invites us to thought, to hope, and to work like all other days. More than all other days, it is precious, for it is the present, the only time in which we live, love, and create. Let us rejoice in the wonders of the universe, undiscouraged by the limits of our knowledge, undismayed by mysteries not yet explained. May this hour of fellowship carry us forward in common purpose to prepare the future, to redeem the past, so that our lives may be bright with courage and meaning. And now the children will depart for their classes, and we will sing for them.
Do I have the amp working for me? Okay, thank you. My name is John Maher, so that means this is Carver Elementary Month. This month, on the 1st, and today and next week, Carver will be the grateful beneficiary of the special collection. That means if you choose to help Carver by check, you should put on the memo line special collection, or I think the word Carver would serve the same purpose. And I want to tell you a little bit about Carver, and many of you know these things, many others don't. I really, really like the place. I've been involved with Carver. I think this is my 6th year. And I don't think there's been a time, even 6 years and beyond, that helping a worthy public school is more important. We have a Secretary of Education that is, and a maximum leader that is not particularly friendly to public education and might prefer to see the money going to private or parochial or charter schools to the extent they can manage that. So it's just, it's a very, very important time. Carver Elementary is a K to 6th grade school out on Elmwood. It has they have about 400 students there, and about 80% plus of those are from Hispanic or Central American or even South American Spanish extraction. It's a dual language school, and that means the kids, they actually are trying to graduate at the end of 6th grade, kids who are facile, both literate and speaking and understanding 2 languages. The research shows that whether or not the children hang on to the dual languages on into high school or college, the graduates of this kind of study do very, very well, better than students who do not participate. They get better jobs, they are better earners, and perhaps most importantly, they are more accepting, tolerant, understanding, and empathetic to people who are different from themselves. There are things that happen to a kid's brain when they learn to learn in 2 languages as well. And they have an excellent, excellent school out there. They have a very devoted faculty, many of whom come from Mexico, Central America, and South America. I'm thinking of one from Bogota. And last year, the outstanding elementary school teacher of the year for the entire Kansas City School District was a young guy named Derek Wiggins, who's a 2nd grade teacher out there. These kids come from chaos, to say the least. I think you know, given the times we have right now, that dads get spirited away, no hugs goodbye, no packing a suitcase, no nothing. He doesn't come home one day, and maybe 4 or 5 days later he calls from Mexico, and they try to set something up on Skype, and that hits, of course, the family itself hard, but it strikes fear into all the other households that know the family and know what has transpired. It's a young guy, a 5th grader that I worked with, wrote an essay about losing his dad that would make you think. A little girl says, I don't like the police. And the teacher says, why? And she says, well, if a police car comes into the neighborhood, we have to hide. And yet, these kids come out there, and they do their very fair share to create one of the best learning atmospheres in the city. And that's not just my opinion. And school administrators, they want to administer, and teachers want to teach, and everybody wants to create. a good learning atmosphere, but when it happens, the kids deserve their fair share of the credit. And these kids even more so because of the chaos they come from. But the substitute teachers who come out there and the resource teachers, art, music, and so on, I grill them partly because I like to hear it, what they say, and partly because I want to report it to you. And they tell me that walking away, Carver has one of the finest learning atmospheres in the city. And I'm thinking at this moment of an art teacher who said, you know, the only reason I'm still in education is these Carver kids. So that's what it's like out there. The collection we're taking is going to be spent in part for enrichment activities, gas for the bus to go see the Brown versus Board of Education Museum or the George Washington Carver Museum. School uniforms for families that can't buy them yet. You don't find these school uniforms in thrift stores, which is where most of these folks have to go to get clothing. Maybe some money or some groceries to tide a family over for the weekend. The need is pretty endless. But one thing, and I want to point this out to you, is that there are no administrative costs here. Whatever you do, if you choose to write a check for $50 or $100 or whatever you think is appropriate, every dime goes to help the kids. This is administered and distributed by a caring faculty who knows both the intimate story of the child and the big picture of the whole school and its needs. And it goes to support values we share. I'm thinking of inherent worth and dignity of every individual, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another, and encouragement to spiritual growth, and the goal of world community. I mean, we're hitting a bunch of them there. I'm gonna promise you that whatever you do for these kids and their school will be the most valuable and valued and effective contribution that you will make to any particular cause, purpose, or recipient in this year. We have a partnership. This all comes from something set up by More Squared some years back, partnering churches with local schools. And as you might expect, a lot of these, the majority of them have faded over time, but not All Souls in Carver. Roma Lee Taunton started this, gave this project real life, and then when personal circumstances interfered, asked Peg and me if we would pick it up and go. And through the wonderful volunteers that we have that go out there, and through what you folks are doing by way of financial help, All Souls continues to strongly live out the original commitment that we have made to these kids and their schools. So I work on notes and something to come up here and say and get all nervous and get through it when I know that what I say doesn't really make that much difference, that you folks have always seen to the special place in your heart that Carver holds, and you've always taken care of these kids in their schools. So about the only essential word is thanks. Thanks very much on behalf of all the kids.
Please join with me in saying the words of dedication for our offering. We dedicate our offerings and our actions to the mission at the heart of this congregation, to build a respectful, caring community, to inspire personal and spiritual growth, and to create a just and compassionate society.
This reading is a passage that was written during Dietrich Bonhoeffer's 2 years of imprisonment by the Hitler regime from 1943 to 45. He was executed just days before Hitler's suicide and the liberation of the camp where he was being held. It clearly cannot have been intended to refer to any current political figure.
Folly is a more dangerous enemy to the good than evil is. One can protest against evil. It can be unmasked and, if need be, prevented by force. But against folly, we have no defense. Neither protest nor force can touch it. Reasoning is no use. Facts that contradict personal prejudices can simply be disbelieved. Indeed, the fool can counter by criticizing them. And if the facts are undeniable, they can just be pushed aside as trivial exceptions.
So the fool, as distinct from the scoundrel, is completely self-satisfied. In fact, he can easily become dangerous, as it does not take much to make him aggressive. A fool must therefore be treated more cautiously than a scoundrel. We shall never again try to convince a fool by reason, for it is both useless and dangerous.
So if we are to deal adequately with folly, we must try to understand its nature. This much is certain, that it is a moral rather than an intellectual defect. There are people who are mentally agile but foolish, and people who are mentally slow but very far from foolish. Thus, we get the impression that folly is likely to be not a congenital defect, but one that is acquired. When people make fools of themselves or allow others to make fools of them.
If we look more closely, we see that any violent display of power, whether political or religious, produces an outburst of folly in a large part of humanity. Indeed, this seems actually to be a psychological and sociological law. The power of some needs the folly of others. The upsurge of power makes such an overwhelming impression that people are deprived of their independent judgment and, more or less unconsciously, give up trying to assess the new state of affairs for themselves.
The fact that fools are often stubborn, one feels, in fact, when talking to them, that one is dealing not with the persons themselves, but with slogans, catchwords, and the like, which have taken hold of them. They are under a spell, they're blinded. Their very nature is being misused and exploited. So having thus become a passive instrument, the fool will be capable of any evil, and at the same time, incapable of seeing that it is evil.
At this point, it is quite clear that folly can be overcome, not by instruction, but only by an act of liberation. Until that has taken place, we may as well abandon all attempts to convince the fool. But there is some consolation in these thoughts on folly. They in no way justify us in thinking that most people are fools in all circumstances. What will really matter is whether those in power expect more from people's folly than from their wisdom and independence of mind.
Nothing in the 62 years of my own life has prepared me for the events of the past year. Nothing I have personally experienced thus far appears to offer me guidance for action if any of the various national or international, political or military or environmental disasters that loom on the horizon actually comes to pass. My elders, who lived through the Second World War or the Cuban Missile Crisis, may have a better sense of how to cope with a world turned upside down in an instant. But for all the changes that we have seen since then, it has really been a pretty smooth ride since 1955, and that's all I know. Maybe that's true for some of you as well. On the other hand, part of the point of education is to understand that the world didn't come into being on the day I was born. Just because we haven't been through a particular crisis in our own time doesn't mean that no one ever has. And so I turn to history for wisdom, as people and communities have done throughout the ages. What we remember and how we remember what happened in eras before ours profoundly shapes what is going to seem possible for us in the days ahead. And how we evaluate the behavior and the choices of the folks who faced a crisis long ago can illuminate what our own actions ought to be. Which is why I have been thinking a lot lately about André Trocmé and Dietrich Bonhoeffer. These two men were both evangelical Protestant ministers who lived through the Nazi domination of Europe, with its persecution of dissenters and minorities, especially Jews. Bonhoeffer, whose name you might already know, was a German pastor and theologian. Trocmé was a French Huguenot pastor, educator, and activist. Both were highly intelligent, committed Christians. Both came of privileged childhoods. Both spent a year of graduate theological study at Union Seminary in New York. Both began their careers as pacifists and advocates for the poor. If you do recognize Bonhoeffer, it is likely as a martyr to Hitler's Third Reich. He was hanged at Flossenburg concentration camp 2 weeks before its liberation in 1945. Trocmé might be a less familiar name. He survived the war years, dying in 1971 at the age of 70. You may have heard the name of his parish in southern France, though. He and his wife Magda served the congregation in Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, a village whose occupants sheltered and rescued some 3,000 to 5,000 Jewish and other refugees in the years between 1940 and 1944. Both men were appalled by and unalterably opposed to the rise of National Socialism and Adolf Hitler. Both believed that Nazi ideology was fundamentally incompatible with the gospel of Jesus Christ, and that the Christian church had a moral duty to bear witness against Hitler's policies and to help those who suffered as a result of them. André Trocmé was 5 years older than Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Born just after the turn of the century in 1901, Trocmé studied religion in Paris at the Sorbonne. During his 6 years there, he was increasingly drawn to the beliefs of the International Fellowship of Reconciliation, an ecumenical pacifist organization founded in response to the horrors of World War I in Europe. In 1923, Trocmé helped to establish the fellowship's French chapter. In 1925, seeking a course of study that emphasized social action as well as theology, he enrolled at New York's Union Theological Seminary. While there, he met an independent-minded young Italian woman named Magda, studying at the School of Social Work. Within a year, they were married. Upon his return to France the following year, Trocmé took a pastorate in a northern mining village. There, he brought out his pacifist beliefs in full force, giving sermons on the subject of nonviolence, hosting pacifist youth groups, and giving testimony at the trials of conscientious objectors. The bureaucracy of the Reformed Church quickly became uncomfortable with his unconventional views, and the young pastor soon agreed to relocate to a small, remote southern village with its own quirky history. In Le Chambon-sur-Lignon on the Vivarais Plateau, the collective memory of their own suffering as a religious minority created in the inhabitants a strong suspicion of all authoritarian governments. As Huguenot, that is to say Calvinist Protestants, they had been persecuted in France by the Catholic authorities from the 16th to the end of the 18th centuries, and later they would provide shelter to fellow Protestants escaping discrimination and persecution. The nonconformist André and Magda Trocmé and their 4 children were a perfect fit. By 1938, Trocmé and his university friend and assistant, the Reverend Edward Theiss, decided to establish a pacifist Christian boarding school to prepare local country youngsters to enter the university. The Collège Lycée International Sévenol was soon drawing students from around the world. When Germany invaded France and established the puppet Vichy government in 1940, Le Chambon lay outside the occupied zone. Nevertheless, Trocmé told his parishioners, "Tremendous pressure will be put on us to submit passively to a totalitarian ideology. The duty of Christians is to use the weapons of the Spirit to oppose the violence that they will try to put on our consciences. We shall resist whenever our adversaries demand of us obedience contrary to the orders of the gospel. We shall do so without fear, but also without pride and without hate. In December of that year, a German Jewish woman fleeing Nazi internment came to the door of the Trocmé parsonage. Magda welcomed her, sheltered, and fed her for several days, but was unsuccessful in persuading the mayor to issue false identity papers for her. The woman went on to try to make her way to the Swiss border, and Andre got in touch with the American Friends Service Committee in Marseille to explore how his church might help provide relief supplies to some of the 30,000 foreign Jews being held in internment camps in southern France. The Quaker leaders told him that they could often get people released from the camps. The problem was that no one wanted to help them. There was nowhere for them to go. When Trocmé assured them that his own and other villages on the Vivarais Plateau would welcome these detainees, including the Jews, a steady stream of released prisoners began to flow to Le Chambon from camps at Gour, Les Milles, Rivesaltes, and others. Children whose parents had not survived or could not get released were registered as international students at the Lycée Savenol. Farming families in the region took in strangers who they would identify as cousins or in-laws. As word of mouth spread, endangered Jews and others made their own way to Le Chambon, where the ever-efficient Magda assigned them to schools, shelters, or host families in the area. Many were eventually escorted over the 300 kilometers to the Swiss border by local guides who were well aware that they were following the same route their persecuted Huguenot ancestors had traveled centuries earlier. Several international organizations helped to provide funds for food, clothing, and false identity papers. The danger of these activities increased when Germany occupied southern France in late 1942, since the authorities were not unaware of what was going on. In February of the following year, French police arrested Trocmé and Theiss, as well as the headmaster of the local primary school, Roger Darcissac. The story goes that the officers arrived to take Andre in the early evening, and he and Magda first ate supper with them. As always, Magda saw nothing extraordinary in this gesture. Why not, she says, it was dinner time. The three men were held for an anxious month at a camp near Limoges and then released. But not everyone was so fortunate. That June, German forces arrested 18 students at the village high school and sent the 5 Jews to Auschwitz, where they died. Their teacher, Daniel Trocmé, Andre's cousin, turned himself in so as to be with them. He was eventually also gassed by the SS. And Roger Leforestier, Le Chambon's physician, who was especially active in helping Jews obtain false documents, was arrested and shot by the Gestapo 2 weeks before the Vivarais Plateau was liberated on September 2nd, 1944. By that time, the citizens of Le Chambon and other plateau villages had rescued nearly 5,000 refugees, the majority of them Jews and many of them children. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was also an educator. 5 years younger than Trocmé, he did his academic work in Tübingen and Berlin, briefly serving a German parish in Barcelona, and also spending a year in New York at Union Theological Seminary in 1930. He never crossed paths with Andre Trocmé, but I like to think maybe they checked out some of the same books from the library there. They shared many of the same Christian pacifist ideals. Bonhoeffer was something of an academic star. He received his Doctor of Theology degree summa cum laude from the University of Berlin at the age of 21. Considered too young for ordination, he was awarded the Study and Teaching Fellowship, which brought him to New York, where he was not impressed by the academic rigor, but made lifelong international friendships and was introduced to the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem and the preaching of Adam Clayton Powell. He returned to Germany with a collection of recordings of African American spirituals and an abiding commitment to the idea of Christianity as a force of liberation for the poor and oppressed. He was immediately made a lecturer in systematic theology at the University of Berlin, the youngest person ever appointed to that post. Once he turned 25, Bonhoeffer was ordained in the established German Protestant Church and was appointed as a youth secretary to the fledgling organization that would become the World Council of Churches. But his promising international academic and ecclesiastical career was radically disrupted by history a year and a half later when Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany in January of 1933. 2 days later, Bonhoeffer delivered a radio address in which he attacked Hitler and warned Germany against slipping into an idolatrous cult of the Führer. He was cut off the air in the middle of a sentence. As Hitler's administration worked to consolidate power, one of their targets was the established national church. Many pastors welcomed the advent of a strong leader who proposed to make Germany great again, and were especially supportive of measures to exclude non-Aryans, meaning anyone with Jewish ethnic heritage, even if they happened to be baptized Christians, from positions of influence in either the government or the church. Bonhoeffer found himself increasingly in the role of the young leader of resistance against these forces. When the non-Aryan exclusion provision became official policy of the church that September, he helped Martin Niemöller to organize the Pastors' Emergency League as a vehicle for religious resistance. Something between 20 to 30% of Protestant ministers in Germany joined that league. These activities made Bonhoeffer's position at the university politically tenuous. He was offered a parish ministry in Berlin, but instead chose in the fall of 1933 to accept a 2-year appointment to serve a pair of German-speaking congregations in London. He hoped that from this location he would be able to use his international contacts to encourage support for churches and ministers in Germany who were committed to resisting Nazism. In May of 1934, Karl Barth and other anti-Nazi theologians drafted what became known as the Barmen Declaration, which said nothing explicitly about Hitler or his political agenda, but affirmed that Orthodox Christian churches were exclusively accountable to God's commandments and to Jesus' leadership. As his term with the London churches reached its end date, Bonhoeffer again had a choice. He was invited to India to study nonviolence at Mahatma Gandhi's ashram, or to take charge of an underground seminary for the education of ministerial candidates who had signed the Barmen Declaration and intended to lead churches that opposed the Nazi regime. He returned to Germany as head of the Confessing Church Seminary in Finkenwald on the Polish border. By 1936, he had been denounced as a pacifist and enemy of the state, and his authorization to teach at the university had been revoked. The following autumn, the Gestapo closed the seminary and arrested 27 students, teachers, and former students. By 1938, the Gestapo had banned him from the city of Berlin, and with war obviously nearing, Bonhoeffer was in danger of being conscripted into the German military. He would have refused armed service as a matter of conscience, which at that point would have been a capital offense. So his sister's husband arranged to have him join the military intelligence office on the basis of his foreign contacts. There, Bonhoeffer discovered an upper echelon group plotting to assassinate the Führer. and tried to assist them by seeking assurances that Britain and other allied nations would offer reasonable peace terms if the conspiracy were successful. In June 1939, at the invitation of Union Theological Seminary, Bonhoeffer again left for the United States, but he quickly came to regret his decision. He wrote, "I've come to the conclusion that I made a mistake in coming to America. Christians in Germany will have to face the terrible alternative of either willing the defeat of their nation in order that Christian civilization may survive, or willing the victory of their nation and thereby destroying civilization. I know which of these alternatives I must choose, but I cannot make that choice from a position of security." Despite strong pressures from his friends to stay in the United States, he returned to Germany in July on the last scheduled steamer to cross the Atlantic. By 1941, Bonhoeffer had been forbidden to speak in public or print or have published any of his writings. He continued to correspond with his pastor friends and former students while writing a book about Christian ethics, which he intended to be the culmination of his theological work. He also used his position in the intelligence office to aid German Jews seeking to flee Nazi-controlled Europe. In January of 1943, he became engaged to be married, and in April, he and his sister and brother-in-law were all arrested. Originally suspected of having embezzled money from the government for their own benefit, Bonhoeffer and his brother-in-law were held in prison awaiting trial for 18 months while the charges were investigated. Over time, it became clear that the money was actually meant to be used to help escaping Jews reach Switzerland, a more serious matter. In July of 1944, one of several attempts to kill Hitler failed, and documents were discovered indicating that Bonhoeffer had a minor role in the conspiracy. He was then seized by the Gestapo and transferred to their high-security prison facility before being placed in a concentration camp, first at Buchenwald and then Flossenburg. When the diaries of Admiral Carneris, the leader of the intelligence office and of the assassination conspiracies, were found and shown to Hitler, all the known participants were condemned to death out of hand. Bonhoeffer and several others were executed by hanging on April 9th, barely 2 weeks before the camp would be liberated by Allied forces and Hitler himself would commit suicide. Both of these men were Christian leaders for whom Christian values opposed everything Hitler stood for and called them to action to prevent as much damage as they could. One flew quietly under the radar as much as possible, working in solidarity with the humble people of his parish to aid and shelter their fellow human beings in grave danger. The other gave national and international witness against the evil that Hitler and his intentions represented, and sacrificed his own pacifist conscience in the effort to prevent that evil from achieving its ends. Both believed that they were doing what any person of conscience and decency in their position would naturally do, and both were appalled by the failure of the church they loved and served to live up to what they saw as its moral calling in response to the times. One was faithful unto death. The other was more fortunate, but that was sheer accident in both cases and might easily have turned out otherwise. So where does the path of integrity lie? With the voice that sounds the alarm as loudly as possible, the public testimony that will not be denied, or with the quiet service that frustrates evil's intention of suffering and preserves innocent lives? Both must take a stand. Both must break the unjust laws, risk betrayal and persecution, find a courage that they did not know they had. Neither can act alone, but must implicate others, risking not only their own lives, but those they have a duty to protect. And they are, to a large extent, mutually exclusive. The person who is hiding Jews in the basement had better not be writing scathing letters to the editor. And the person who does write those letters probably isn't the best one to be hiding the Jews. So give it some thought. What would you want your role to be if the circumstances were to come upon us such that a choice had to be made? What part would you hope to see this All Souls community play? Neither side of the dilemma is easy or safe, but as Bonhoeffer so truly foresaw, the German churches that played it safe and took the easy path in that crucial decade of Hitler's power found themselves morally bankrupt later on when the crisis had passed and the implications of that decision began to come clear. As for me personally, I see the virtues of both sides. And maybe, after all, you simply find yourself where you find yourself as history unfolds around you. Maybe the task comes to you as an opportunity, a fugitive stranger at the door or a radio show, and you just do what seems like the right thing in that moment. Which makes me think of the most perfect prayer I know. It was originally spoken by another leader of greatly insightful integrity, the first Secretary General of the United Nations, Dag Hammarskjöld. In his journal, later published as the book Markings, he records this aspiration: O Lord, thine the day, and I the days. This prayer does not whine about our need for courage or strength or wisdom. It does not give God advice about how to proceed or complain about the plans that we don't understand. It simply hopes that whatever the day may bring us, it will be part of whatever good and holy creative purposes are at work in the world, and asks that we may be equal to the demands and the opportunities that will be found within just that one day. For if we can be faithful to what this one day offers and what it asks of us, and if that day serves to bend the arc of justice and in some way redeem the suffering of the world, that is as much as anybody needs to pray for. I think of Andre and Magda Trachme and Dietrich Bonhoeffer when that prayer rises in my spirit. These days are not like all the other days I have known. I don't know what they might yet demand of me and of us. But others have found the paths of integrity and resistance before now, and the courage to follow them, which means there is hope. Will you rise and sing with me?
Decide till the multitude make virtue of the faith have denied.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fires of commitment. For all these we carry in our own minds and hearts until we are together again. So for all who seek God, may God go with you. For all who embrace life, may life return your affection. For all who seek the right path, may a way be found and the courage to take it step by step. So be it.